right, everybody. Welcome back to the WhiteFlag Warriors Podcast. I am the guest host today, Dave Frank. You might know me as Brave Dave. And we are here with a very good friend of mine. He is a public speaker, a chef, a writer, a content creator, and I'm sure a million other things that would only begin to scratch the surface of the kind of stuff that he gets into. I'm very happy to introduce Kyle Weiss to everyone.
Hello.
How are you, Kyle?
Passable. How about yourself, Dave?
You know, I'm doing okay. Things have been better, but that's part of, that's part of what we do, right? Is honesty and our status updates to each other, because Lord
Yep.
knows that nobody else, everyone wants the how you doing, I'm doing great, end of conversation.
Yep.
You know?
That's why I say passable, and it's one of my key phrases that a lot of people find very curious, because they say, "Oh, are you not doing good?" And I'm like, "I said I'm doing passable." That's the honest truth.
That's gonna have to do. That's gonna have to do for now. I followed you for a really long time, and I know you in the same way that a lot of people, thousands of people, know you. We've had conversations outside of content creation and stuff, but for the most part, I get the same, portal into your life that everybody else gets. And that's why I'm glad that you're here, because I think that you have a story that's waiting to be told that I think a lot of people are going to be really excited to hear. I don't want to beat around the bush. I would love for you to just tell us how you got to this point in your life today. What's your story, Kyle?
Telling my story, especially like up to the point that I am now, would probably take us 4 or 5 of these recordings to do. And so I'm going to try and keep it as concise yet detailed as possible. So I was born into a interesting family situation, and when I say interesting, I mean it was terrible. My mother and father were both addicts. They both had lots of mental health challenges throughout my biological family. And when I was about 2, and this is what I've heard from my parents, they were taking me into doctors because they thought that I had an ear infection. I wasn't walking. I was barely crawling. I wasn't walking, and I was rolling. That was my locomotion, as I would roll around to where I needed to go.
Right.
And my parents were like, something is wrong with this child. So they took me in. Doctors looked at my ears, and this is just hearsay, so to speak, for an ear infection. They couldn't find anything. Later on, they took me in. This all happened before about the age of 5. They took me into other specialists. More specialists were saying ear infection. Other people were saying that there was something wrong with the motor function portions of my brain. And they tried putting me on things like antibiotic to see if it would help, and nothing helped. The word autism never came to the forefront, never did. And so what ended up happening from there is that they started noticing other things like social problems. As I'm getting through school, I'm not making friends. I have zero interest in interacting with other kids. I basically want to either go outside and literally elope out into the wilderness, and there were reasons for that too, and to go out and just let nature be my teacher, or I would just stick my nose in books, and I would just go and find small spaces to hide in, like closets, underneath cabinets, inside piles of laundry with a flashlight, and then I would be reading books. So what ended up happening is that at that period of my life, probably from birth to about age 5, my mother and father were doing okay. And when I say okay, that is that's when they were having problems, like I mentioned earlier, psychologically and with substance abuse. Things were just stable, if that makes sense.
It was passable.
It was barely passable, yeah. But things were stable. Something switched. I don't know when it happened. Probably around age 5 or 6. And my mother and father were not doing well financially. They never were doing particularly well financially, but it's kind of like how it is these days. It's like one little problem, things are so expensive, everything is so expensive that if you have one even minor emergency, it can topple everything in your life over. It's like people say, we're closer to being 2 months away from being in a bad financial situation than we are a millionaire. And that's pretty much where my parents were at that point.
Was this something you were always like aware of at that age? Like you were very self-aware of like that situation, or did you learn about it as you got older?
No, I ended up learning about it later because I didn't have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
So it's like I just figured that everybody's parents, I figured that everybody's parents were people that you woke up and you tripped over your mom and there's vodka bottles everywhere. I thought that was normal. I just figured and I didn't have friends. I didn't make a friend until I was about 14 years old. So I literally had nothing to compare it to. So I just thought it was normal. And then if I watched something on TV and it wasn't like that, I just was told, oh, well, that's fantasy. That's make believe. That's not real. So
Right.
the days that I woke up into that were terrible. Beyond that, that's when the abuse started. And yes, content warning for anybody that is listening to this. I will be talking about things like unaliving, and I will be talking about abuse because that has peppered and bolstered the experience that I had growing up as well. This is why I told you that this is going to be a very, very long story if I really want to get into it. The hurtful part of what my mother's interaction started, and we only started figuring out this later. They call it dissociative identity disorder these days, and she had that in a laundry list of all sorts of other initialisms having to do with mental health that she very creatively figured out how to bury, either emotionally, through substance abuse, and she was functional. She tried to hold a job. I think she did stuff with real estate for a while. She tried to hold, she did stuff in the food service industry like I did. She tried to hold herself together. But when you have this combination of mental health and substance abuse, it doesn't make a very like cohesive. It doesn't make a cohesive parenting and child experience. I'll just say it like that.
Right.
I don't remember a lot of what happened in my childhood except for the traumas that happened. And that was where I started to put things together because as I got older, I started to piece together these themes basically. And because I didn't learn to talk until I was I was about 3.5 when I would make vocalizations, I would hum, I would not communicate the way that I was supposed to. I was delayed. So I had a lot of developmental delays. I had a lot of social developmental delays, and I had a lot of hard time putting together what happened in my life, in my experience. So when you're asking, like, did I realize this and was I self-aware of it? Absolutely not. They were getting deposited because I have a 4K memory for things, but I didn't know what to do with the pieces.
One of your first landmarks was the rolling.
Right.
I remember getting carted to the doctor, and my mom was like, he somersaults for hours and we're concerned, like these are things that, people can hear and connect with. So, this is exactly what we were listening for.
Right. One of the things about autism, and I'll tie this into the story a little bit, is that I think that it's only probably been in about the last 10 to 15 years that we've gotten a more developed idea of what autism looks like. I have, as an advocate, tried to get away from saying that autism looks like me. And I had to do that before doing any type of advocacy, because when I would meet other autistic people, such as my friend Russell Lehman, who's fairly well known in the advocacy community, we were not a lot alike, but we were. And that was the thing that really stood out to me. As I got to know other autistic people, I started realizing that what the spectrum really is, and it is not just some linear thing where it's like, it's not like a volume knob. You're not turning, somebody's life does not have the autism either turned up to full or they're at a 3. It doesn't work like that. It is it's almost a spherical spectrum to where you exist at a point in that sphere, and two-dimensionally It would be like a circle. When I started learning about what autism looks like, it looks very, very different than somebody who maybe is non-speaking, for example, and their communication is done through an AAC device or something different that is not just vocal communication. That also means that the way that they communicate, not only physically and actually, is different, but that those communication cues that we use when we're speaking verbally, such as gestures, like I'm gesturing right now, those are not available. And if the more things that are taken away from somebody that has autism in particular, the more difficult it is for them. And a lot of people like to say, "Oh, well, it's difficult for me because I can't communicate with this person." Autism, the thing that I think that combines all of us together is that we have a lot of things taken away from us. And that's a societal problem. That is not an autism problem. Those things that are taken away from us means that our interaction and how we reach out into the world and how the world comes back into us is very different. And so now when we say, what does autism look like in a child versus me, years ago, decades ago, rolling, that didn't look like autism back then. They didn't know what it was. That's why I went in for ear infections. Today, it would be much more likely that if a child was not to ambulate themselves properly at that age, that they're doing something different, like somersaulting or rolling, that doctors might say, okay, we've figured out that there's nothing physically wrong with this child. What is going on up in the brain? And we tend to look at the brain last, and I wish we didn't do that. Mental health is important. That's why you're doing this. That's why we're here. Mental health also includes neurodivergence because we have to treat ourselves in a particular way. And we have to take care of that, but we have to know it's there. We have to know it's there. We have to acknowledge that. And as children, we rely on our parents to do that.
Yeah, there was a lot of intolerance came from forward action things. You know what I mean? If they're acting like this way, they must be a lunatic, and now we're seeing like this flip where if they're acting this way, it's not this.
Right.
Or inaction as in we're not going to consider this a possibility. We're not going to look into this thing first. And it's just as detrimental, it's just as detrimental to exclude, thinking as it is to have incorrect thinking.
Right.
I really like that point you brought up.
Have you ever heard of like the horse and the zebra analogy within the medical field or even mental health field when they're doing diagnoses?
No, what? Maybe I have. Enlighten me, please.
So I picked this up from the I think it's the Ehlers-Danlos people. Their community is actually very interesting because their symbolism is a zebra, and the reason why they picked up a zebra as like their mascot for that condition is that doctors are told to look for a horse. They're told to look for a horse. Let's say that your condition is symbolized by a horse. Doctors are trained to look at that. Well, when they find a zebra, what do? They're not looking for a zebra. So number one, they're going to miss it. If they do catch it, it's going to look strange to them. So with that whole analogy, they put it together of you're a zebra, you're not a strange horse. They're not actually looking at that for what it is. So they're seeing something completely different. And that's how it is a lot of the times. And that's why misdiagnoses happen, especially with autism, especially if you're not a white male, which is how autism diagnosis gets focused even today. And I'm really working hard to try and get people to change their thinking on that. A lot of women get completely missed in as being autistic because it wasn't designed to look for that. The horse in an autism case, think of a brown horse, is somebody who looks like me, white skin, male, probably at the time, a child. So it's seen as a white male child disorder. What happens when it doesn't present itself in that fashion? It's going to get missed. I got missed way back in the day before autism was even really on the forefront, and people are still getting missed today. And if we keep missing that, we're not taking care of our mental health. We're not taking care of the way that we are interacting with society. We're not taking care of the way that we're interacting with our friends and our livelihoods and our families. And it can lead to a lot of other conditions like depression. It can lead to suicide ideation. It can lead to a lot of different other things just simply because the doctors were not looking for what they're supposed to be looking for.
Right. But we still warn patients not to use confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is
it's the opposite end of the spectrum. It still exists in both realms,
Yeah. I am a person that does believe that self-diagnosis is valid, and I'll tell you why. I know that there are some confirmation biases that are out there that can be dangerous. However, with things like autism, because there is no medication there's no prescribed medication that can alleviate the symptoms of autism. I think it's really an important step for a lot of people with self-diagnosis with autism because it gets them started. The other part of it too is that it costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to get an autism diagnosis. That's not accessible financially to a lot of people. It just isn't. It wasn't for me. I would not have gotten my diagnosis if I wasn't on Medicaid at a very, very low point in time in my life when I had healthcare, but I wasn't doing well, in my world. And that also is another thing that happens a lot with autistic people. We, 85% of us as an autistic individual, 85% of us are either underemployed or unemployed at any given time. Like me right now, I finished out my grant and I don't have work and it's stressful. It's very, very stressful. I don't know what I'm going to do. So bearing that, self-diagnosis is important in the senses that it gets people started. And I get into arguments with a lot of people, with diagnosticians, for mental health therapists, counselors, etc., that don't like that because they feel that it's taking away from the autistic experience of people that have been diagnosed. They think it's taking away resources, and I don't see it that way. I see it as we have podcasts like yours, we have advocate accounts on all of the major social media sites, people like me telling our story, and I'm not alone. So when people start saying, that person is relatable, that person is talking about something that's my life experience, holy crap, same thing happened to me. That's how I got to meet you, is that I started hearing other people's experiences with their lives and going, this is me. This is what my experience was like. Even though I was diagnosed as being autistic, again, like me being a child, I had nothing to compare it to. I didn't have a world outside to be like, cool, that's relatable, this person's relatable, this story is relatable. All I knew is that I had a piece of paper that said, congratulations, you have autism. That was it. There was no guidance, there was no story, there was nothing. So when I started finding myself in amongst my peers, both that were diagnosed and undiagnosed, I started to realize that our personal stories are very important. Our lived experiences are very valuable. So I don't always encourage, I don't think people have to get an official diagnosis. That's not always viable for people, both financially and sometimes maybe they just don't want to. Maybe they don't need it. Maybe they're good with just saying, yeah, I'm probably autistic. And if they want to call themselves autistic, okay, I don't have a problem with that. I think that having more people that are bringing this to the forefront and recognizing it is good.
Yeah.
As long as it's being done in a responsible manner. For example, I don't accept people that say that they're autistic and if they're doing bad things and using their autism as an excuse to do or say bad things or to hurt people, that's unacceptable. We do have to take some responsibility for our own selves, regardless of if we have a disability or not. And I don't think that people like that are doing it for good reasons. They're not. It actually ends up taking us down, like as an autistic community, and it makes it hard for us if they're saying, "Oh, I said this really racist thing, but that's okay. I have autism." That's not okay.
Right.
That's not okay.
The self-diagnosis conversation, I know it's big in the autism community, it's big in the ADHD community, it's big in a lot of communities that are trying to have these shared experiences. Right. And people ask me all the time, and I know some of them are doing it because they're genuinely curious, some are doing it because it's kind of like the affirmative language test. Does Dave pass? Right. You know what I mean? And I always say the same thing. I'm like, what would you like it for? If I told you that you could receive it free today from a licensed professional today, what would be your next step? Because if you want it because it helps you feel more valid and complete, then go seek that out. That's great. Right. If you're doing it because you want medication, go do that because that's great. Mm-hmm. And some people say, well, I don't really want medication anyway. I'm like, everything else is lifestyle changes and holistic choices. And that's all free and doesn't require anybody else except you and an internet connection, really.
Right.
I will whatever your source is.
And I hate to interrupt, it's just because you mentioned that it's free and it's like holistic and lifestyle choices. I do have to make an exception for that because a lot of people that are getting diagnosed professionally these days, when they started out and maybe did not have um, the resources or even the knowledge available for something like a mental health professional. What do you do when that is not available to you? And you mentioned, well, things are free and it's holistic and lifestyle choices. Um, it's really expensive to exist in the year of our Lord 2024 right now. It is, everybody's feeling it. Even if you are stable, have a job, maybe you've got safety nets, you've got a career going, degree holding, like you have things in place in life. I am not one of those people. There are only so many choices that a person has in order to get certain things. So even some lifestyle choices or even holistic things or ways that you could probably put yourself together are not as easily accessible. I am very privileged in the fact that I am a survivor, and I hate calling myself a survivor, especially with more of the story, which I will tell coming up here in a bit, because I don't have a choice. That's part of the reason why I don't like the words like survivor and resilience, for example. It's because my other choice is that I'm not here anymore. I'm not on this planet anymore. So we do have to make some very stiff choices sometimes, and they're not always the best ones. Substance abuse, which fortunately I missed that gene. I missed that habit that my parents and pretty much almost everybody in my biological family had. But that's a choice that people make, is self-medication when it comes down to that. Self-diagnosis is okay. Self-medicating is something that is a concerning thing. That's a very, very concerning thing. And it's a big thing within the autism community as well, because there is no medication to make autism better. So a lot of people will turn to substance abuse.
Yeah, and my answer was a little niche considering that, when someone asked me, well, what do you think of self-diagnosing for a condition that has a misuse and or deficiency in dopamine? That's a lot easier for me to say holistic and lifestyle choices, because they have a direct correlation between how your lived experience is and the things that you do.
Right, 100%.
So it's definitely not always a one-to-one scenario, but I agree with everything you said. I think knowing what you want to get out of the experience is probably a great determining factor. Right. First, before you try and beat yourself up about it.
Yeah, 100%.
So tell me more, Kyle. We were discussing, your kind of initial exploration into autism and what it meant for you in your life and what you had found out. I'd love to hear more.
But let's go back and circle back around to some childhood stories, and we can kind of weave it in that way. So I explained first and foremost like how autism started presenting itself probably before I even knew it. Like I had some very early memories of me having some strange experiences, like sensory issues, and I remember clearly like not having a voice, like if that makes sense. I remember feeling like the words were trapped. And like it stopped, like I could not use my voice, and I was very frustrated by that. I even remember my first meltdown being around age 3, that I wanted something. And I was sitting on the floor and I wanted something. And this is kind of a key thing where it was like where my parents came into play, because I would point. Because one of the things that within autism diagnosis is that they say in children is that if they are having trouble speaking, they will grab somebody else's hand to grab the thing that they want, or they will use their hand to point at the thing that they wanted. My parents were not close people. I didn't have a lot of like holding time. I didn't have a lot of that because they just kind of left me alone. They just kind of let me do whatever I want to, and that was it. I wanted something and I was pointing at it like this. I wasn't doing this, I was doing this. And I couldn't get the words out. I was kind of making a sound that was getting stuck right here. And my mother lost it. She was so frustrated. I don't know what her chemical intake of choice was that day, but I remember her getting up and she came up behind me and hit me right on the back of the head, and I went forward. I was 3 years old. And I don't remember what it was. So it was like I was having a meltdown in amongst having that situation happen. And I remember that. That's one of my first memories. And it's, sorry, a little hard to remember.
It's okay.
And that's the problem with autistic brains too, is that we remember things like I don't have like a very I'm not an academic minded person. I am really good at taking patterns and remembering everything in a very, very high detailed manner. And when a memory like that comes up, it can really just replay itself as if I was there in 4K. And it's hard too, because those are some of the only memories that I have access to. Moving on from that, when I started getting older, like in school age years, it started to become very evident that there were other problems with me because now I had something else to compare it to. When I got into school, I was around other children. I was in school and doing something next to kids who were also in school doing something, and those things were very, very different. I got into school, did not make friends very easily. I think I attempted it probably around kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. It just did not go well. I had learned to speak at that point. I started going to school level speech therapy, I think in first grade, which they didn't understand because there was on my records in school, it said that I had communication problems, but it didn't say what. So they just put me in a very generic speech therapy class. It was, for kids that were having trouble with reading, writing, speaking, etc. And they didn't really know what to do with me because at that point I am speaking just as clearly and fluently as I am now. It literally went from me not saying much to me, I was speaking paragraphs and nobody knew why. So even that was a marker for autism. Nobody was thinking autism. They were seeing the horse, they were not seeing the zebra.
Is any of that internal? Do you remember any of that transition between the frustration of not having something come out to it just did?
Not really. I think that probably about the only thing that I could relate it to, like on a like cognitive, like memory or emotional standpoint, was finally. Finally, it was
Yeah.
almost like a floodgate being opened up. That's how it felt. It was just kind of like, and I don't know why it happened. I don't know if anybody can describe why that switchover happens. But it's like, again, comprehension wasn't the problem. It was getting it out. It was like I just
Yeah.
had
Right.
this thing. The same thing happened with reading too. When I started learning the alphabet, when I started learning how to put words together and be like, well, oh, that sound are these letters put together? Or that's what I started putting that together. And then it was rapid fire, like everything started to fall into place. So I had a comprehensive reading level that was very, very high, especially at that level. So I went from people thinking that I was broken or there was something intellectually very, very wrong with me to the complete opposite. And had great reading comprehension. Why the heck isn't Kyle making friends? He's not doing well in school, but he's doing all these things very, very well. And he was very focused on that. Um, so yeah, it wasn't just a sudden, oh wow, this, like I now have this. It was just relief. I just remember feeling relief. Like finally, I can do it all the other people are asking me to do. I
Yeah.
can communicate with them because not being able to communicate is frustrating for the people that want you to communicate with them. It's even more frustrating for the people that want to communicate with you in return. School experiences. Let's go on that. I went to school in Nevada. Nevada is always been ranked in the very, very lowest percentile for education graduation. We call it the Mississippi of the West here for a reason. We're always at the very, very bottom. And in fact, if we're beating Mississippi, everybody high fives each other in the education community around here. It's like, we're not
Nice.
dead last. I experienced that in the sense that the education was extremely poor quality for public education. And there were just not services and places for somebody going through what I was going through, especially at the time. There was nowhere for me to go. There was nothing for me to do. And so teachers had some very creative ways of dealing with me. When I say creative, I am emphasizing it was bad. It was really, really bad. In second grade, I had a teacher. I think she's passed away at this point, but I'm not going to say her name publicly. I did remember it. She was having such a hard time with me sitting in my seat, focusing on work, not getting up and like literally, I would just get up and leave the classroom. I don't even know why I did it. I would just be like, oh, okay, it's time to leave. It was like I was a cat or something, and it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go over there now, and that's not something that you do in school. So her
Yeah.
solution to this is she brought a large refrigerator box from her home, and she cut out a door in it. She put it in the front of the classroom. She cut a hole in the top, hole in the door, put my desk in it, and that was the solution. So I was literally a second grader with my desk
Oh
in a
my God.
box. And
Wow.
she encouraged kids to write on the box. She to try and shame correct me, and the things were not very nice. Kids would oftentimes, if the teacher had their back turned, would throw things, hard objects, pencils, paper through the top of the box. I needed light to see to do my work. And so, yeah, that was pretty much how I
Wow.
spent a majority of my second grade year. And that was probably debatably the worst thing that happened, but I think that it's a great story to tell to show how far we've come. Not only what was happening back then, but to the understanding. It's like, I mean, could you imagine a teacher doing that to a child at this point? I mean, maybe in some places they have some version of that, but that was awful. That was one of the worst things that I can say, at least through
Yeah.
my grades 1 through 6 that I went through. There were other teachers and instances and like snapshot things, but for something as continuous as that for almost an entire school year, I spent in a box.
And you are not 90 years old. Okay, this did not happen in 1955. This was very recent,
Yeah,
all things considered.
this was in the 80s. So yeah,
That's wild. To know that you were not the only one in a box somewhere, you know, or in that,
probably not.
some proverbial version of that. For in the 80s and 90s.
Mhm.
That's a lot of progress in a short amount of time.
And it's not
Um,
perfect. I still hear horror stories about the way that, especially autistic kids and even kids with ADHD or any other
yeah,
neurodivergence, still are not being treated and understood and cared for in a public education setting as they should be. And I didn't know. Once again, I didn't have anything to compare it to. I did know that I was different at that point because I was the only kid that was in a box. But when I started to talk to other people in my advocacy about their school experiences, I started going, there's still a problem out here. There's still a huge problem that is happening with people like us. And it might not be the refrigerator box, but it's something akin to that. And that's the kind of thing that I'm not a parent. I don't think that I really have a right to say anything about how kids get treated, but I do remember how I was treated. I was a child once, and I want to get farther and farther away from that kind of a treatment.
yeah. You definitely notice it in modern schools now, and again, kind of this theme we're talking about, where it's like it's not like a direct on the offensive kind of situation. It's
Hmm.
sometimes it's neglect, sometimes it's lack of carrying the situation, IEP programs not being followed correctly. There's a big thing in schools right now, particularly elementary schools, of clipping up and down, where behavior is based on kind of like red light, yellow light, green light. And the better you behave, the higher up the clip you go. The worse you behave, down you go.
Right.
But when you start at 100 and your only way is down, there's no encouragement. There's no incentive for a lot of kids. And when you receive rewards based off of this quote unquote behavior,
Right.
a lot of neurodivergent behavior is not good behavior.
Yes.
In that, within the grid lines of that system. So
I
that's
was about to
tough,
say it's the
you know?
system.
Yeah.
It really when it comes down to it is that much like I was describing in the like how diagnoses happen with people where doctors are looking for a horse. If you want to take that analogy and put it into education, and again, not being in education like K through 12 for quite a while, you as a parent would understand the that system more. The education system is also not is expecting you to be a horse if you want to continue that metaphor. So if doctors are looking for a horse and they see a zebra, you go into school and they expect you to be a horse and you're still being a zebra. That creates a huge problem with discipline. It creates a huge problem with learning, accessibility to that learning. And it also creates a lot of stress on the educators themselves because they're not necessarily prepared for it. Now, where your kids are going to school, Dave, I don't know like what the school district does about that, but I do know in Nevada that we are still very, very behind with how kids, like if I were in school, if I were a 7-year-old, 8-year-old that is in school currently, there are still problems that exist within the public education system. Now, there are charter schools. Charter schools are a thing that did not really exist when I was growing up. That was not an option. That's been some of the solution to get some of Nevada's education and graduation numbers up, is to get these private enterprise, charter schools to kind of pick up the slack. And I think that that sucks because it's like, that's again, not always accessible. They only have so many seats that they can put kids in. There's only so much space, so much accessibility from one end of town to the other to get kids there. And I mean, of course, this is an election year for the school board and whatnot here, which I'm not a part of. I just happened to chance across like some of the issues that are coming up. It's not really getting much better. They're trying to have reactive solutions instead of proactive solutions, and I wish that would change.
Yeah, it's hard to even give like an update on my end about what things are like here, because like my particular school that my kids go to, we happen to really like. And I think it's based around how the staff in particular operates. That Kentucky in general, especially like, in our city and our county, they all have enough of the correct rules, enough of the, beneficial policies that help kids that are neurodivergent, that help kids that are, struggling. And, we take advantage of those. My daughter has ADHD, and, the program that she's on is really helpful. And it's not made to leave her behind. It's also not made to give her a bunch of allowances that let her run around like a crazy person, which she would if you let her. But ultimately, like we've talked about, I've got such a narrow view because I've got one school in one city and one county and one state. And I know it's not that way everywhere, but it's good to see that at least a working model does exist, that, when the staff implements what's there, and they do tend to care, that it's a possibility. It's just so many tiny little divisions that all have to, follow follow that curriculum. It's hard. I would not want to be the one in charge of making sure it all happens, but it's definitely possible.
I wouldn't either, and my advocacy really focuses on autistic adults and, probably other people with neurodivergence too, just because they a lot of our experiences they might not originate in the same spot, but we end up in the same spot. Because I focus on adults specifically and the experience, especially post K through 12. I don't have much to say about that. I don't really know. That's not my area of expertise. What I do know is that, especially for autism, for example, there's a lot more, and thank goodness for this, there's a lot more services and tools and components and programs that are available for kids. We're not going to get into the ABA thing because that will start a huge argument that I do not think you want in your comment section. But the one thing that I will say is that there are definitely things out there. The problem begins when kids, I think when they reach about age 20, I think it's 22 to 24, if you have autism, you're pretty much cut loose. If you do not, if an autistic person has not gotten all of their life skills together, at least in a very, very basic format, there's not a lot of services that are available once you hit a certain age milestone in your early 20s.
Right.
And that's where a lot of problems begin. Because, I mean, heck, kids are, at least around here, are barely capable of understanding how to fill out a rental application, how to do their taxes, how to budget for, say, groceries if they, they need to manage their money. Those things are not always in place for kids that are neurotypical and just, they're floating by in a very much more average or expected life path. So imagine having to deal with all of those things as an autistic person or a person with an indivisible disability on top of all of that. And that's part of the reason why I like doing advocacy and hearing stories, telling my stories, learning from people, helping to teach people about what things are available out there and maybe methodology that they can use to get their lives going, because there are just a lot of people out there with autism that are not prepared to deal with the world as it is.
It's interesting enough that there are, as a neurotypical adult, could take 20 different classes on the challenges of becoming an adult in their world, you know, but all the new experiences that kids with ADHD and autism and, you know, whatever else they're going through are experiencing, there's still new experiences after that.
Yeah.
That never changed, you know? And actually, I would like to fast forward in your timeline here a little bit in your story to maybe not all the way to 24, but there's an element here I want to explore. You know, you're getting older. Kids that are, you know, growing up and starting to explore their sexuality, what their sexual preferences are, what their gender identity is. That is an entire different world of struggle.
Yes.
Than having to, you know, having to deal with the rest of the world and how it views you as being autistic. That's two worlds for you. You know what I mean? How did, you know, when was the intersection of those two things like prevalent in your life growing up? And when did you start to notice, like, I got to figure my shit out twice?
I love how you said that, honestly. Like, I actually have a way that I describe my coming out process is that I've had to come out twice. I had to first come out as gay. And then when I started to realize that there was a name for what was wrong with a lot of my interactions and development in life, I had to come out as autistic. And I think that it's interesting because I came out very, very young. I came out when I was 13 years old, which that was in the 90s, and that was not very common. Most people were coming out at, you know, college, after college. And so to be 13 years old to come out was like I was at that point, I was very self-aware in the sense that I knew what my body was doing. And I was in middle school, and there was a black kid named Sean that I saw in the locker room, and my life changed forever after that. I was head over heels in love with this guy. As much as a 12 or 13-year-old kid could experience love. I just knew that there was now something also even more different about me in my life experience. And I'm like, cool, do I need any more different things? I would really, really like to put my video game on easy mode because I cannot take all of this really difficult downloadable content at this point. So yeah, I coming out very, very young actually helps me and navigating being gay, being queer, helped me navigate the autism part of it later in life because I got diagnosed with autism in 2013. So it's been just about 11 years at this point. But I was fully an adult at that point. And so I just had to kind of go back into my experiences and be just like, cool, now I have to tell people, or I don't have to, but like I now have the ability, the agency to tell people about this other thing. Telling people that I'm gay is not hard, at least at this point. It can be sometimes, but I'm used to it. It's more familiar at this point. Telling people I was autistic was much scarier than telling people I was gay. That was the thing that surprised me when I started going through that process.
I didn't know for sure, but I had an inkling that was the case. Especially now, you know, 2024. I feel it's a lot. It's easier to explain either. You don't even have to explain it most of the time. But I, you know, even from your content alone, watching your content, you know, a lot of the stories are about your times in queer bars and kind of the mishaps and hijinks of trying to, you know, communicate your autism to, you know, to, you know, potential love interest. I appreciate the humor. I love it. It's just my style. But there is this part of me that wonders, like, why bother if the experiences seem inherently negative? Like, why even bother? You know, why bother continuing to tackle this situation in these queer bars with people that you feel maybe don't understand? Or is that a motivator for you to make that a standard?
Well, I'm gonna return a question. What choice do I have?
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, it's easy for a lot of people, especially if they're straight, to exist out in the world. To, you know, I mean, there's much more of a likelihood of a single straight guy or gal or, you know, or a they going into a grocery store and meeting somebody that's in a straight, more kind of heteronormative dynamic. than it is for me basically to maybe see somebody that I'm attracted to, maybe get along with them. And then there's that huge chasm that exists of, well, are they gay? Are they even attracted to me type of thing? So queer bars especially and queer spaces are extremely important. Culturally, they're extremely important. Socially, they're places for people to congregate. It's hard enough to find places for us to congregate that aren't, work, school, and home, basically. So there has to be a space for people to exist and be human beings. And queer bars are the place where people that are, that have sexual orientation minorities, or if they have gender nonconforming identities, to go congregate and exist. And so that's why I do it. It's because I want connection, not necessarily to find a relationship, but I love going into queer bars specifically just to absorb and say, this is where I belong. I might not feel like I belong there because the autism can sometimes make it difficult, but I know that I, as a human being, have a right to be in this space. And so, like, no, people go to queer bars and gay spaces for numerous reasons. They go there because their friends are there. They go there because they're looking to find the love of their life, or they're looking to get laid. There's myriad reasons why people go to queer bars. I personally go to queer bars to exist. It's a place where at least I have one factor that is taken out of the equation, where I'm not going to get judged and harassed or even be in danger for being who I am. So that's the motivation.
Right. And it's funny to think about. I'm pan, right? But when you're on that spectrum of sexuality, one sliver of mine does exist in a heteronormative space.
Right.
So
that's a really good thing to bring up. And I hate to interrupt, but heteronormativity that comes from somebody that is pan or that they're bi, if they happen to get into a relationship that is more heteronormative, basically, that doesn't exclude you from the community. And there's always a lot of debate, especially because it's Pride Month, it being June. There is a lot of criticisms and hate that goes towards from internally in the queer community towards people that are pan or if they're bi, and I think that sucks. Just because if you are male or male identifying and you're with somebody who is female or female identifying and it looks very heteronormative, that doesn't mean that you get your queer card taken away. No, you're still a part of this. You just happens to be your life. And I have a lot of people that I know that are pan and that are bi, and they are in what are straight relationships, and I think that they belong in our and it would belong in our spaces as much as anybody else does, if you're queer.
Yeah. That's been a running joke for a while too. Bi girls, how does it? How are you and your boyfriend doing? Bi guys, how are you and your girlfriend doing? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? As insinuating that. We may say they're, someone that is on does have a sexual orientation that includes someone of the opposite sex that would somehow, it's like for show, basically,
right.
And I think that it probably stems from this sense that like, there's not this kind of required struggle that comes from, say, being gay specifically.
Right.
It's,
I would hazard a guess to say that not being a bi or a pan person, I was always very careful about how I address these things, as those are not my communities. But from talking with people that are bi and pan, the one thing that I've learned is that there is definitely still a struggle there. Just because you have the option to have a more heteronormative, straight passing relationship, once again, doesn't take away from your experience with that. I mean, when I talk to other bi people about their coming out process, they felt just as strange when they were a kid, saying, holy crap, that guy over there is just as attractive as that girl that I saw, earlier in the day. That still creates a dynamic in their mind of like, I'm different. Like, so that's still there. And how do you express that? It's like, yeah, you could basically, a lot of bi people growing up that I've talked to have, their lives were capable in going in both realms. And so because it's easier basically to go in the realm of like a male, female, man, woman dynamic as they're growing up, they don't always get to explore that other part of themselves. And what you said about the whole, like, oh, if you're bi, like, how's your partner doing? because there's this conception that bisexual people need to have like both relationships happening at the same time, or that they're cheaters, or that they're there's infidelity problems, and that's just not that. We're still people. Some people might have polyamorous tendencies, and some people might have more monogamous tendencies, and that can exist in the bi and pan world as well. And I don't know. I don't like the way that bisexual and pansexual people in particular get treated a lot of the time.
Yeah. I was told once that it didn't count. And I have thick skin. It took a lot of trolls online to even, and this was not even online. This was not some rando. This was like someone that I had met somewhere, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't know." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm pan." They said, "Oh, well, that doesn't count. You just like everything." And immediately I was like, you know what? I just don't have any interest in discussing it with other people anymore.
Sure.
That's what I discovered.
Let me circle back around to that. The person that said that to you, were they a part of the queer community?
They were gay, but
Okay.
I held no correlation between the statement and the person and you know what I mean?
The reason why I asked that in particular is that, if a straight person said that to you, it would probably seem strange. If they said those exact words, like, "Oh, it doesn't count." So my brother has this saying. My brother was in the military, and he has this saying of, like, when it comes down to sexuality, especially, if you sleep with one guy, you're gay forever. You're gay forever. That's just kind of how a lot of people view it. I know that that's not actually how it is, but a lot of people view it that way. If you're bisexual and you sleep with women exclusively and you haven't explored that part of it, it still doesn't make you straight. That's where the toxicity comes in a lot in the queer community. I know this is kind of an awkward way of saying this. Are we allowed to use adult language on this podcast?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my brother, going back to that, says that you can't unfuck a goat. You fuck one goat and you're a goat fucker for life. That's it.
Yeah.
So a straight person basically saying, "Oh, you just had sex with a guy, you're not gay." Just even if you did it once as a bisexual or pan person. However, if you have sex with one woman and enjoyed it as a gay person, you're like, "Well, maybe I'm not gay, maybe I'm bi." Immediately you are typecast and put into a completely different, complicated position of criticism if you're in the queer space. And that's one of the things that I think that does need to be worked on inside the community, basically, is how we categorize and judge each other as people in queer spaces.
Yeah, it started trying to break away from, dualities and heteronormative, categorizations.
Right.
But I think that's an inherently human thing to do. Not that I agree with it, but I at least understand how it comes out by nature that people try to logic their way into saying you are more in this bucket regardless. So this conversation that we're having, so one of my favorite things you've ever said, and the minute that I knew we were going to talk, I had to write it down so I could reference it. You say, though many people have wanted to change me, to fix me, or even hope to outgrow and get therapy and move past my challenges that I have, the one thing that has never changed is me. Mm-hmm. Which I love. I absolutely love that. From all the talks that we've had about, your life growing up and, how we view ourselves and our communities. I love the aspect of not changing for anyone. Obviously you've had your own changes that you've implemented on your own through growth. What are, in your mind, what are like the big changes that you've had that you look back on and say, I came from this to this, and that was a step for me, by me. I'm glad I did that for myself.
I don't know if I have a proper answer to that because it's still a work in progress. And I know that that's a really cheap way of basically trying to not answer that question, but I just don't know if I have the capability of answering it. When I said that quote about change, the thing that hasn't changed is me. That meant me as a person, the things that are indelible to me, the things that will never, I'm always going to be autistic. I'm always going to be gay. I am always going to have a strange kind of choppy, flat affect to my speech patterns. There are just certain things that just make me me. The things that I am changing, that is a work in progress, is Am I happy with those things? Am I comfortable with those things? Am I being authentic with those things? Are my relationships, both personally and with other people, related to those things? Are those things okay? That's a work in progress. So am I the same person that I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? No. I am still the same human being, but I'm not the same person. I address things far differently than I used to. I interact with people in a way that is completely different. As far as a milestone or, like a thing like, hey, I did that, high fives all around, that's still a work in progress. That's still a big work in progress. I have a lot of things that I'm proud of. I love the man that I've become. I have loved the lessons that I've learned. I love the mistakes that I personally made that I learned from. And I think that that is a point of privilege that not a lot of people get that perspective on. So what do I do with it? I want to help other people with it. I want to help educate other people with it. I want to take my experience to let people know, A, you're not alone. And B, let me see if I can guide you and give some insight about things that you could also change. And I love it when people come back to me that are in a stage that I would love to be one day, and they give those things to me. Giving those things back is a really important part.
Which you definitely do on social media. I see it all the time. I see it in your lives, I see it in your content. And even that same, quote that we were discussing, that's what you go on to say is, what has changed is, my experiences while being on here, and you guys have changed me. I know what you give to other people on the platform, but I'm curious because every creator is different. What have you taken from this? From all the community of strangers and close friends, and from your experience in there, what has been most impressioned onto you?
I honestly, the word that came to mind when you asked the first part of that question is like, what has been given to me? I'm going to say it in one word: humility. I have been absolutely humbled listening to other people's experiences, especially people that have differing intersectionalities and experiences than my own. That's who I've learned from. I am forever grateful for the people that have opened themselves up to me and to the world and have answered very, very difficult questions that might be questions that I never thought to ask. So no, that's the biggest thing is I the biggest takeaway from it and the biggest benefit that I've gotten from it has been humility, to realize that I'm not alone, but why I'm not alone. And I'm not alone because I'm not the only one. Everybody has a story to tell. I could talk about my homelessness. I could talk about my experiences with my relationships that I've had. But I had to connect to other people going back to when I was a kid. I now have something to compare it to. What do I do with that information? I learn from it. Sometimes I sit down, I shut up, I stop talking, and I start downloading that information from somebody else, and it makes me go, holy shit, this is huge. And I am super grateful for that. That's one of the biggest benefits of us having a community where we can communicate with each other digitally, share ourselves on platforms, and do that because that connects us all.
Yeah. What do you what do you want to change? You've seen a lot. And you've obviously learned to encapsulate that lightning in a bottle, that positive force that you have now. But you're self-aware enough to see the negative around it too. What whether it's in the queer community, whether it's in the autistic community, we've all seen so much world in such short little time.
I like how you
past,
said that.
5-6 years.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to change?
I think the biggest thing that I want to change is the access to information that people outside neurodivergent communities and outside queer communities has. On my last job that I had, for example, I went around the state of Nevada and I was educating other educators at systems of higher education in Nevada. I was going to nonprofits, other state organizations and agencies, and basically teaching them Queer 101. Like, that's what I called it. It was LGBTQIA plus 101. And I would stand up and publicly speak in front of people through PowerPoint presentation and literally start at, if you've never even heard the word gay or lesbian before, or you've never heard the word transgender before, we're going to explore this. And this is going to be in a non-judgmental environment, and questions are welcome. I want this to be a trusting, safe space to do that. So taking that model and giving that accessibility to other people, not just in the state of Nevada, and doing it in the sense of talking about autism to agencies and schools and everything else. That access to that information and quality information is really important to me. I want to change the world with information. Information, I think, is key. It's something that I love to give to other people. I love to take in more. I love to develop it. And I like it to be a continuation of that. But the accessibility is usually the biggest hurdle with that. So if I was going to change anything, it would be the accessibility that people have to the information that they need about both queer and neurodivergent people.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're a good public speaker. I like listening to you. I saw the clip that you did for the Autistic Caucus for creating change. That was really cool to see. And something else I had learned about you, you have a certification in mental health first aid, which actually we have another friend of WhiteFlag that we talk with that is exploring that as well for first responders to have, certifications for mental health first aid, which completely underutilized, right? When it could solve so many case by case issues.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, because for a lot of people, I guarantee someone listening to this has never heard of that ever. What is that? If I open up a first aid kit, I know what's in there. So what's in a mental health first aid kit?
I actually love how you mentioned the opening up like a first aid kit, because that's really how they describe it going through that course. Mental health first aid essentially gives you that first aid kit, that toolkit, to help somebody who is in crisis. And that class, when I took it, was extremely hard because they encouraged people to share their stories, because the suicide is something that is prevalent in many people's lives. It is not exclusive to one group of people, one aspect of people, one cultural experience. It is something that is a human problem that we have to contend with. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. And one of the biggest things that I especially took away from it was just some of the language that gets used with it, is that when you're talking with somebody that is in crisis, shaming them is not what you want to do. Calling them, calling it attention giving, or maybe waiting is one of the things that they teach about that, is that that's something that's happening right now. It's kind of like if somebody has a serious wound, basically, you're going to be like, you know what, why don't you just go ahead and sleep on that and see how you feel about it tomorrow? You don't want to do that. And that's one of the things that mental health first aid really kind of gets you into, is that it teaches you basically how to do, it's like you're a field medic, but for somebody's crisis that's happening in their brain. You're not going to fix them. You're not going to address the reasons that led up to that. You're just trying to keep them alive. You want to keep them here for one more day and get them to a place that professionally can help them. So really, it's kind of like you're a field medic, but for somebody's crisis in their brain.
What was the most impactful tool that you took away from there that I never would have thought to use that as like a talking point with that person, or something I never would have considered without the class?
Honestly, it's listening. This is a huge thing about that, is that when somebody is at the point where they're at the highest level of crisis in their own mind, where they might want to take their own life, listening to them is really important, because they're going to tell you what they need. And this threw me for a loop being an autistic person, because you're almost forced to read between the lines in conversation, and I am not good at doing that. When you're listening to somebody, they are going to tell you what they need. And not directly. They're not going to be like, "Hey, I'm feeling real bad right now, and I don't want to live anymore." They're not going to do it that way. They're going to say, with all full emotion, they're going to say, I give up. I don't want to be here anymore. And then because you're listening to that, you can say, "Tell me about that. Tell me more about that. Talk to me about what's happening." If we listen and start to let the person guide you through them, all I'm doing is offering a hand, and I hope that they take it. Listening is probably one of the biggest factors in dealing with somebody with a crisis, because they are the ones that are hurting. They don't want somebody telling them what to do. They don't want somebody telling them where they went wrong. They don't want somebody telling them that they don't matter. Telling somebody to go away, basically, if they say that, or that they're doing it for attention, is paramount to saying, "I don't care if you're on this planet anymore." Listening to people is important.
Hell yeah, it is. Kyle, I have a feeling you're going to be back on this podcast because there's more that we could unpack together. But I love where you ended that, being able to listen to people to get their true story. It's what we got to do with each other today, and I'm so glad that we did. Kyle Weiss, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing stuff with us. I want to end on a final question before we let people know where to find you.
Sure.
You've got one message here, one statement that you'd like, everybody to know. What's one thing that you want people to know about, the communities that you're in, for the missions that you're after? What's the takeaway from Kyle Weiss today?
I was going to take that into a completely different direction when you first said it. I would say that my first takeaway is actually going to be a message to the people who are in a tough spot, because this is important to me. Treat yourself with grace. Treat yourself with kindness. It doesn't matter what you're going through. It might be a personal problem. You might be in a relationship that is not treating you very well. You might be in a relationship with yourself that you're not treating yourself very well. Be kind to yourself and give yourself some space and some grace. It's really important to do that, just to take a little bit of a step back and check in with yourself a little bit. If anything, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal. I think we all need to start putting ourselves on our own pedestal, especially. And that starts with just treating yourself well. That's what I really would like everybody to take away. It's not about me. None of what I do is necessarily about me. I enjoy doing it. I would love to do it forever and make a living at it, but it's not about me. It's about the people who are listening to this right now that might be in a spot where they are not sure about themselves. They're not sure about their life. They're not even sure if they're going to see tomorrow. Take some time to check in with yourself. Be kind to yourself.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. For anyone listening that is really connecting with what you're saying and wants to, have some more shared experience with you and your story, where can they find you?
So I am available on TikTok at Kyle_Weiss. I am available on Instagram at _Kyle_Weiss. And honestly, if you just search Kyle Weiss autism on Google, you'll probably end up finding me.
Fantastic. Kyle, thank you again so much for hanging out with me today. I loved hearing all the different stories and getting your insight on stuff. Thank you all. We will be back again soon. All right, everyone, that was our episode for today. And as always, it was great to spend time with you and our guests while hearing another incredible true story of mental health. Never forget that you are not alone. The White Flag app is a place for free, anonymous, peer-to-peer support where you can connect with others, help or be helped, and share your amazing stories and journeys just like the ones that you hear on the show. You can check out White Flag on the App Store and Play Store or learn more at whiteflagapp.com. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.